You're listening to The Voice of Russia. I'm Tom Spender. Today we're talking about whether portfolio careers, in which one person is self-employed and has multiple sources of income, are the future of employment. Self-employment often rises during a recession because there is less full-time work on offer, but there are also longer-term shifts at play. In our ageing society, more people are choosing to work beyond retirement age to supplement meagre pensions. On the other hand, is a portfolio career a solution for young people who haven't yet acquired any skills? The self-employed also tend to earn less than those in full-time jobs. Will they be able to buy a house or set up a pension? So is a portfolio career really the future of work for all? And if so, is this a good thing? Joining me in the studio to discuss this are Sarah Byrne, online editor at the website Career Shifters, and Almut McDowell, a psychologist specialising in work-life balance at the University of Surrey. And on the phone we have John Philpott of The Jobs Economist, an independent online think tank, and Barry Hobson, author of a book on portfolio careers. So I'd just like to start by asking all of our guests in turn, are portfolio careers the future for us all? Almut McDowell, perhaps we could start with you.
The future for us all? No, I don't think so, quite frankly. I think they're a good thing. They give many of us options to pursue things that we want to do in our lives. They make it easier to have a good work-life balance. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't forget this is a fairly educated middle-class concept. And you do have to have a basis and a platform from which to start your portfolio career in the first place.
Sarah Byrne.
I don't think it is the future for everybody as well, basically because everyone has a very distinctive personality and what works for one person won't work for another. With a portfolio career, there can be some instability and you need to be able to sort of multitask different ideas. For some people, that would be overwhelming and just one straight career would be a much better match for them.
John Philpott, what do you think?
30 years ago, people like Charles Handy were talking about portfolio careers being the future. They haven't really taken off in quite the way that was suggested then. And I think if you actually look at or interpret the figures correctly, only about 1 in 20 workers at present is a portfolio worker, and I expect even if the number were to double, in the next 10 to 20 years, that would still leave us with a very small proportion of portfolio workers in the overall workforce.
Barry Hobson, do you think a large group, perhaps the majority of people, might be portfolio careerists in the future?
I think it is developing quite rapidly, and it's quite interesting for me as to why Charles Handy's idea has taken so long, really, to come into fruition. I think the main reason for that is the development of digital technology, the internet and so on. Without what we have today, I think it'd be more and more difficult for many people to pursue portfolio careers.
Barry Hobson, which broad groups in society is this kind of employment route most suited to, or is it more of a person-by-person, individual characteristics type thing?
Talk about it. The problem is we have so little research on this. I have an ongoing discussion with the Office of National Statistics on this. We know that there are 1.4 million people in the UK that have 2 or more jobs. From the one piece of research that has been done, it looks like about 70% of those do actually choose that lifestyle as opposed to being forced to take 2 jobs for economic reasons. The other piece of research that's been done suggests that they're particularly attractive to the Generation Y group, in other words, the under 28s. And, maybe surprisingly, they are very attractive as well to the over 60s group.
Sarah Byrne, you are more or less a Generation Yer, but you are definitely not over 60. Did you sort of fall into being a portfolio careerist, or was it a choice from the outset?
It was a little bit of both, actually. I knew that a traditional 9-to-5 style of working was not working for my personality. So I was going through a process of exploring my different options, trying out different types of jobs, and I discovered this idea of having a portfolio career, and I decided I would give that a go for 6 months, which has turned into 3 years. So now it feels like a more decisive thing for me. At the start, it was more of an inquiry.
But is it a portfolio career in the sense that you do literally different kinds of job, or is it more of a freelance thing in which you do the same kind of thing for various different people?
It's portfolio in that the bulk of my work is online editing as a freelancer, but then I also do work as a film and TV extra, and I occasionally do modelling jobs as well. So different.
Is one of those your bread and butter, or one of those your big earner? Mm-hmm. How does it work?
The online editing job is the bread and butter. I have a regular client, which would be career shifters, and alongside that, occasional jobs will pop up. And with the extras work and modelling, that's as and when I can fit it in.
Almut McDowell, does that sound like a good work-life balance to you?
It sounds like a good and healthy work-life balance if that's actually what suits your needs. Because in my private practice, I also do quite a bit of coaching with individuals. And one of the potential drawbacks of portfolio working is actually it might not work for you. And you might find that you can't pay the bills and you can't pay the mortgage. You want to go back to a full-time job. And that's where often the problems start, because a lot of recruiters, HR professions, often also it's done through an intermediary. They don't quite know what to do with portfolio workers. You know, psychologists, we know that ideally when you're looking to fill a job, you're looking for the right knowledge, skills and abilities. But actually with a lot of recruitment professionals, they're still looking for the linearity in a career profile. So when somebody has been job hopping and doing different things, they don't quite know what box to put them in. So that can actually make it really, really tricky to re-enter a full-time employment market if that's what you want to do.
John Philpott, a bit of part-time modelling, a bit of editing, a bit of film work. That sounds great, doesn't it?
I think it does. Of course, when you talk about portfolio careers, it makes it sound, sort of potentially interesting and exciting in a way, and it can be for some people. However, I think for the majority, particularly those who are sort of younger, often it's a choice that's made because there aren't full-time jobs available. And often as well, a lot of workers that fall into this category, actually aren't doing things that are particularly exciting at all. I mean, quite a lot of sort of multi-job holders will be cleaning staff or people working in bars, sort of working in 2 or 3 different jobs just to sort of pay the bills. So, I think we've got to be careful about sort of a lot of the terminology in this area.
What do most people want, do you think? Do most people want a full-time job because of the stability or just simply the focus that it offers? Or if all other things were equal, would most people choose to do a bit of this and a bit of that?
Can I come in on that one?
All right. Okay, Barry Hobson. Yes, sure.
What I found really interesting here is that for the book, we interviewed 40 people. This was about 4 years ago. Not a single person had ever heard the phrase portfolio career. By the end of the interviews, they were all saying to Katie Ledger and I that from now on, when somebody asked them what they did, they proudly say, I have a portfolio career, and then they go on to describe what they did. The majority of them were also saying that, and I just meet people all the time now saying this kind of thing, I can't seem to find a single job that enables me to use all the skills that I want to use, to tap into all the passions that I have, that will help me to create the work-life blend that I want. And the stability and security thing is interesting here too, because the majority of people that I meet, and certainly we interviewed, never want to go back to a full-time job. And in terms of financial security, we followed all these people up for a couple of years, and not a single person out of those 40 was earning less than they had with a full-time job. The majority of them, within 2 years, were earning more than they ever earned with a single full-time job.
John Philpott, does that tally with what your research shows?
I mean, not according to the statistics. Obviously, if you look at relatively small numbers of people, and you'll come up with examples of people doing quite well. But if you look at the generality, income from self-employment is very low compared to employee income, and also very insecure. And I think that's a sort of big issue. I mean, if you're sort of looking for getting a mortgage or getting a loan or what have you. I mean, these things are, sort of quite important and, sort of quite significant. I think as well what's also interesting is that we've seen, we did see, in the early part of the recession, as we do in all recessions, a tendency for people to move in this direction. But over the course of the past year, when we've actually seen a return to sort of growth in the number of employees, the number of self-employed has fallen back again, and that would indicate that once the economy starts to generate what you might call regular jobs with an employer on a sustained basis, most people will tend to choose that option. Although ideally, what a lot of people would prefer, of course, is to work for a single employer, but perhaps do more varied tasks with that employer, so that, as we've heard, they can apply their skills in a variety of different ways. But if they had to choose between the insecurity of the portfolio career and the stability of working in a normal job, then, although some individuals might choose the insecurity, the bulk of people are still preferring the stability.
I have a problem here with the concept of insecurity, because someone that has a full-time job, I was talking to a group of accountants last week, and I was asking them how many of them have got really secure jobs. The majority of people put their hands up, and I said, so what does your contract say? And, of course, their contracts give them between 1 and 3 months security. It's like actually being self-employed, but you only have one client. And increasingly, I think we need to start thinking not in terms of jobs or of projects, because that's what people are hired to do. Certainly, I keep coming across people that reckon they have more security with a portfolio career than they do with a single-track career. For example, one of the people that I interviewed, who was actually a working-class lady with 5 particular jobs, 2 or 3 of which she loved, a couple that she wasn't so keen on, and she contacted me about a year ago to say, I've lost 3 of the 5 that I've got. However, I've still got those other 2, thank goodness, and I'm using my extra time now to find additional jobs.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia. I'm Tom Spender, and today we're talking about portfolio careers. Sarah Byrne, how do you kind of tackle these issues of insecurity? I mean, have you thought about a mortgage? Have you thought about a pension? Are these things that you're ready to deal with as a portfolio careerist?
I've thought about a pension, and I can actually accommodate that within the salary that I get, so that's not a problem. I've thought about a mortgage. Living in London as a young person, it's something that I'm thinking about but not thinking about seriously right now. Does it worry me? I'm not sure. And I'm in a stage of my life where I'm looking to build up my career further and create something that I feel really happy with, and then start to think about the mortgage and things like that. The insecurity, I don't feel it so much. I have, there are fluctuations in the income I get based on each month, depending on what I'm doing, but I've always been able to pay my rent, and I haven't had a wild panic moment, so it's working out for me. I don't know.
Do you compare yourself to your peers, for example, people that you might have gone to university with, and you see how they're doing relatively? How do you feel? What do you think when you look at them, those who are in jobs that they love and perhaps earning very well, or those who are perhaps in other positions?
I don't compare myself to them because actually my friends are doing very different things. I have somebody who's a corporate lawyer who hates her job, and she actually doesn't have that much money because she spends it all. I have a friend who was a teacher for about 8 years, and she's just quit to run a B&B with her boyfriend. So they're all in different places, and I can't say that there's one person who's loving their job, making tons of money, that I'm jealous of, that I don't know them.
Almond McDowell, people who are in self-employment, whether it's out of choice or not, how do they feel? Is it really stressful?
It's a really, really good question. I think, in a sense, you have to have the support structure in place to make that jump. And in my experience, that is often something that people don't consider, because there's actually really something quite comforting, even though your contract might say, yes, you've got a month or 3 months notice, of having an office, of having a group. And when things are not going so well, you can have a coffee with somebody, you can have a rent, you can get it out of your system. That's a lot harder to do when you're self-employed, because you need to find your own network. network, build it back up again, actually can be a really, really lonely place. And of course, it can be a very competitive place, because the very people who you're networking with, they might also quite like the contracts that you are going for at any one time. So I think it's really, really important to have a good support structure in place.
What kind of support structure might that be?
Good question. Support really it really should come from various sources. It really, really helps to network with other people who've done it, who actually have gone through similar experience. So you can do some learning and sharing that way. It also, of course, makes perfect sense to stay in touch with people who are still in big organizations, because who knows, they might be your clients at some point in time. And also friends and family around you, because in order to make a very flexible life work, you also need, if you've got kids, you need other people in your network who can do the school pickups and so on and so forth. So various sources of support.
How stressed out do people get by being in self-employment?
It depends really on what you do and how you juggle things. It doesn't necessarily have to be stressful. I think often it does get stressful when people haven't thought through all of the steps they need to be taken beforehand. I guess, a bit like marriage, it's not something to be undertaken lightly or wantonly. You do need very careful planning. You also do need some professional advice. I couldn't have set up my sideline business without a good accountant who gave me very sound financial advice. And I think often, when I see coaching clients, it's often those really basic things that people haven't really thought about beforehand.
John Philpott, do you think that we are educated in a way that gives us some of the basic life skills that we might need to cope with being self-employed, and therefore responsible for a lot of the bureaucracy that goes around simply working and living in society?
I think to some extent it's probably improving. It's not good enough. I think, although when you talk about the stress, I mean, one of the interesting things is that in surveys of happiness, the self-employed tend to sort of score relatively highly, and that's because, notwithstanding all the problems, they obviously have a lot of autonomy. In addition, relatively few people set out looking for a portfolio career. What tends to happen is that, sort of people from their mid-40s through to their sort of 60s begin to think that they might like to do something on their own, and they sort of, kind of venture out in this direction. And one of the advantages that they see of that kind of work compared to, working in the 9 to 5 is that they don't actually have to deal with interference from line managers, which tends to be one of the greatest bugbears for people at work. Although I think, as we've rightly heard, there are advantages of working with colleagues because you can sort of exchange views and opinions with them. But by the same token, colleagues can often be the one thing that's worst about your working environment as well. So being freed to some extent from those individuals can be quite liberating.
Are we seeing the end of retirement, as it were? As I understand it, quite a lot of the growth in self-employment is driven by older people who are working beyond retirement age, but obviously would find it difficult to get a full-time position.
Yeah, that's already happening. I mean, again, most of the people that you see working beyond retirement age are actually staying with an employer that they've been with for quite a long time, but moving from full-time to part-time hours. What you're tending to see amongst the self-employed in that group is that people that have lost jobs confront the reality of age discrimination in terms of being recruited, but realise they still have an active life to lead and they need to earn some income, and that's why they turn to self-employment as an option, so that they can work for 2 or 3 employers who might be prepared to take them on, rather than find a single employer who may be slightly reluctant to take on somebody new who's over 60 or 65.
Barry Hobson, what's your story? You're also a portfolio careerist. How did that happen? Was it a choice, or did you get booted out of some kind of job and find yourself having to kind of sink or swim?
Well, before I discovered portfolio careers, I had what I call a serial career, which means every 5-6 years, no matter what you're doing, you need a new challenge, so you tend to move on. But then I discovered you could do more than one thing at a time. But the whole definition is quite interesting, because I think we're all taking one definition, which probably covers most people. That is where you have 2 or more jobs at the same time. What I've been discovering in the last couple of years is what I call sequential portfolio careers. For example, someone who was a finance director of the Building Society, an accountant, didn't want to give up her accountancy, but had enough of all that politics stuff that John was talking about. She also adored skiing. So she and her husband set up a ski school in the French Alps. So in the winter, they go and do that. In the summer, she comes back and does accountancy, and she wants to do both. And I've come across more and more examples recently of people who want to do one thing for 2 or 3 months, or even 6 months, and then something else for another few months.
But what about young people, for example, university leavers? You know, they haven't got 20 years in accountancy behind them, probably don't have much money, perhaps even £30,000 worth of debt. You know, is it a viable option for them?
Well, I think it's already been pointed out, for some of them it's possibly the only option. They have to take a series of part-time jobs. But what we're picking up from the attitude surveys of that particular age group, that fewer of them seem to be interested in the concept of what my mum and dad would have called a proper job. They tend only to think ahead 2, 3, 4 years anyway. My guess is that's not going to change as they get older. They just don't think in terms of having a permanent employer, a permanent job. That's gone. And it was interesting because the CBI, not the most radical organisation, produced an interesting report about 3 years ago on the future of work in 2020. And what they were saying very clearly there was that organisations will strip down to a very small core, but with a very large periphery. And that periphery is going to be temporary workers, part-timers, self-contractors, freelancers, portfolio workers. So those youngsters that are coming up at the moment are probably developing the kind of work lifestyle that is going to be more attractive to employers.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia. I'm Tom Spender, and today we're talking about portfolio careers. Joining me are Sarah Byrne, online editor at the website Career Shifters, Almut McDowell, a psychologist specialising in work-life balance, John Philpott of the independent think tank The Jobs Economist, and Barry Hobson, author of a book on portfolio careers. Sarah Byrne, who does it suit and who doesn't it suit?
I think that you have to have quite a high risk threshold. You've got to be comfortable with some insecurity. I think the stage of life that you're at can definitely affect the decision as well. If you've got a big mortgage and a family to support, then you have to seriously consider what starting a portfolio career could mean and impact on your lifestyle. I think it certainly suits younger people more, who are at a phase in their life where they can experiment and they don't have high responsibilities for the most part. Again, as you mentioned earlier, if you're educated to a certain level, even if you don't have that much work experience, maybe you're a recent graduate, at least you've got some high knowledge that you can bring to the market. So that would certainly help. It wouldn't suit people who prefer to be a specialist and an expert and want to rise to the top of a particular sector and prefer that way of working.
Almut McDowell, you know, Sarah Byrne just said it. If you want to start a family, if you want to have a house, all this kind of thing, then things become a bit more challenging. You know, do you think that the rise in self-employment is going to have a sort of long-term impact on the way our society is shaped?
It might very well do if we see a further growth. I actually do a lot of voluntary outreach work with children in schools, and one of the things that I don't think we've talked enough about today really is the effect on the younger generation and children of people who've got a portfolio career. I was just talking to a 12-year-old the other day, and she was saying, well, my mummy does lots and lots of different things, which is a really good thing because she works a lot from home, and I guess that means we could move anywhere. But actually, I don't really know what she does. And I thought actually there was a really, really interesting point to be raised by a 12-year-old, because actually children like a story and they like role models. They're like somebody to look up to. And if we move towards more portfolio careers, let's not forget we've got a whole young lost generation who don't have jobs, who don't have skills, who don't have these options. So I think there is a real need to start early in primary and secondary education to actually start preparing our next generation for a more flexible future of work.
Do they also get affected by issues of insecurity?
Absolutely. There's sort of some anxiety, insecurity. And also, let's not forget, we've got a very materialistic society. They're very concerned about, where's the next iPhone upgrade going to come from?
John Philpott, what do you make of that? A generation of traumatised children of portfolio careerists?
Well, possibly, although I think actually the sort of bigger issue is for children living in workless households where nobody's got any work at all. That seems to be the cause of the bigger social problem. I think it's an interesting point as to how people growing up in portfolio households, if you like, sort of view their careers and whether they'll be more sort of open to taking on more than one job at a time. Although, again, even for young people, although I think it's been rightly said that in some ways it's sort of easier for young people to sort of do 2 or 3 jobs at a time. Relatively few of them prosper, sort of long term in that way, and you find that actually more, the more successful people will be those that settle down with a stable employer for a period of time and then possibly become what we might call proper portfolio workers later in their life when they built up not just skills and experience but also networks. It's networks with potential clients that often is the key to success in this area.
All right, well, we're more or less out of time. I just want to whiz around our guests and ask them, given all that we've heard, would you recommend a portfolio career to another person? John Philpott.
Yes, but only if it makes sense for them and only if they are aware of all the disadvantages as well as advantages that it conveys.
Barry Hobson, I'm guessing you would recommend a portfolio career?
Yes, as long as they're the right kind of person. Increasingly, you've got a variety of career patterns to choose from. Portfolio career might be appropriate for one part of your life, then maybe a serial career, then a single track one for a while, then back onto a portfolio career. You're not choosing a career pattern for life.
Sarah Byrne.
If you're in a position to do so and you think it would suit you, but I would highly take time to consider exactly what this would mean. Think about the insecurities, think about the responsibilities you have and see if you can make it work before you do it.
And Almut McDowell, would you recommend a portfolio career?
I guess my answer to that would be it depends. In our own research, we've been looking a lot at how people can best negotiate workplace flexibility in their own lives. And one of the really key things there is good communication and negotiation, because those kinds of decisions are rarely about just one person. So talk to the people around you first before you make a decision.
All right. I'd like to thank all my guests. In the studio, we had Sarah Byrne, online editor at the website Career Shifters, and Almut McDowell, a psychologist specialising in work-life balance at the University of Surrey. And on the phone, we had John Philpott of The Jobs Economist, an independent online think tank, and Barry Hobson, author of a book on portfolio careers. Thank you all very much.
Portfolio careers being the future. They haven't really taken off in quite the way that was suggested then. And I think if you actually look at or interpret the figures correctly, only about 1 in 20 workers at present is a portfolio worker, and I expect even if the number were to double, in the next 10 to 20 years, that would still leave us with a very small proportion of portfolio workers in the overall workforce.
Barry Hobson, do you think a large group, perhaps the majority of people, might be portfolio careerists in the future?
But I think it is developing quite rapidly, and it's quite interesting for me as to why Charles Handy's idea has taken so long, really, to come into fruition. I think that
options to pursue things that we want to do in our lives, they make it easier to have a good work-life balance. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't forget this is a fairly educated middle-class concept, and you do have to have a basis and a platform from which to start your portfolio career in the first place.
Sarah Byrne.
I don't think it is the future for everybody as well, basically because everyone has a very distinctive personality, and what works for one person won't work for another. With a portfolio career, there can be some instability, and you need to be able to sort of multitask different ideas. For some people, that would be overwhelming, and just one straight career would be a much better match for them.
John Philpott, what do you think?
30 years ago, people like Charles Handy were talking about...
You're listening to The Voice of Russia. I'm Tom Spender. Today we're talking about whether portfolio careers, in which one person is self-employed and has multiple sources of income, are the future of employment. Self-employment often rises during a recession because there is less full-time work on offer, but there are also longer-term shifts at play. In our ageing society, more people are choosing to work beyond retirement age to supplement meagre pensions. On the other hand, is a portfolio career a solution for young people who haven't yet acquired any skills? The self-employed also tend to earn less.
The main reason for that is the development of digital technology, the internet and so on. Without what we have today, I think it'd be more and more difficult for many people to pursue portfolio careers.
Barry Hobson, which broad groups in society is this kind of employment route most suited to, or is it more of a person-by-person, individual characteristics type thing?
Talk about it. The problem is we have so little research on this. I have an ongoing discussion with the Office of National Statistics on this. We know that there are 1.4 million people in the UK that have 2 or more jobs. From the one piece of research that has been done, it looks like about 70% of those do actually choose that lifestyle as opposed to being forced to take 2 jobs.
Less than those in full-time jobs. Will they be able to buy a house or set up a pension? So is a portfolio career really the future of work for all? And if so, is this a good thing? Joining me in the studio to discuss this are Sarah Byrne, online editor at the website Career Shifters, and Almut McDowell, a psychologist specialising in work-life balance at the University of Surrey. And on the phone we have John Philpott of The Jobs Economist, an independent online think tank, and Barry Hobson, author of a book on portfolio careers. So I'd just like to start by asking all of our guests in turn, are portfolio careers the future for us all? Almut McDowell, perhaps we could start with you.
The future for us all? No, I don't think so, quite frankly. I think they're a good thing. They give many of us